guys, welcome back to A to Z Dentistry, a channel which features easy explanation of various dental topics. And our today's topic is cementum. That is, we'll be learning differences among cellular versus acellular cementum. So without any further delay, let's get started. So our first difference is between the names of the cementum, that is the alternative names, right? So let's get into it. So the synonyms, right? So the cellular cementum is also known as primary cementum versus the acellular cementum, which is also known as the secondary cementum. Now, why we are referring to the cellular cementum as primary here? Because is that it is formed before the teeth reaches its occlusal plane, right? So therefore, it is formed first. It is cellular, and therefore it is called as primary cementum versus the acellular cementum, which is secondary cementum, as it is formed after the tooth reaches its final position, that is the occlusal plane. Therefore, it is acellular and also known as the secondary cementum. Our next difference is between the formation, right? Cellular versus acellular. So the primary cementum or the cellular cementum is the cementum that is formed before the tooth reaches its occlusal plane, right? Whereas the secondary cementum or the acellular cementum is formed after the tooth reaches its occlusal plane, right? So in this diagram we can see, right, that the acellular cementum is the one which is more present more towards the apices of the root, right? So it is devoid of any cells and it is formed once the tooth reaches its occlusal plane. Okay. So the third difference is between the cells of cellular versus acellular cementum. So as the name itself indicates, cellular cementum contains cells which are known as cementocytes, whereas acellular cementum is devoid of any cells, that is, it does not contain any cementocytes. So in this diagram, we can clearly see that just below the dentine, there is a layer of acellular cementum, right? So this layer is devoid of any cells, that is, there is complete absence of cementocytes, whereas just below the level of acellular cementum, we can visualize the cellular cementum which contains the cells which are known as cementocytes. The fourth difference is regarding the location of cellular cementum versus acellular cementum. So the primary cementum is located towards the coronal portion of the root, whereas the secondary cementum is located more towards the apical portion of the root. So here we can see that towards the coronal portion, there is a level of acellular cementum which is present, whereas towards the apices, we can see the cellular cementum. Here we can see that, there are these small dots. These are nothing but the cementocytes, and the apical portion constitutes of the cellular cementum, whereas the coronal portion constitutes of the acellular cementum. The fifth difference is regarding the rate of formation. So there's a difference between rate of formation between the primary cementum versus the secondary cementum. So the primary cementum or the cellular cementum is formed at a much slower rate when compared to secondary cementum or the acellular cementum. The reason being is that in primary cementum, there is a presence of cementocytes, right? So the cementocytes get entrapped within the cementum matrix which is formed. Whereas in case of secondary cementum, there are no cementocytes. Therefore, it is formed at a much faster rate. The sixth difference is regarding the incremental lines. Now, cementum has incremental lines which are known as incremental lines of Salter. So in case of primary cementum, incremental lines are more, whereas in case of secondary cementum, the incremental lines are lesser number. The reason being is that in primary cementum, the cementum is being formed at a much slower rate, right? So therefore, there are more periods of rest, whereas in case of secondary cementum, there is a much less period, right? It is formed at a much faster rate. So the periods of rest, which are denoted by incremental lines of Salter, are very less. So this is how you can correlate between them. So in this diagram, we can see that the incremental lines of Salter are more abundantly present in cellular cementum versus acellular cementum. These are the incremental lines, right? So these are present in more abundance in cellular cementum as compared to acellular cementum. So the seventh difference is between the function of cellular versus acellular cementum. So the primary cementum forms after regenerative periodontal surgery, whereas the secondary cementum contributes to the root length during the growth of the root, right? So these are some of the functions. So the primary cementum, it is, as the name indicates, it is primary, that it forms immediately after any regenerative periodontal procedure is done, whereas the secondary cementum contributes significantly towards the increase in the length of the root in the growing phase. The eighth difference is regarding the calcification of cellular versus acellular cementum. So the acellular cementum is more calcified as compared to cellular cementum, which is less calcified. The reason being is that the acellular cementum is devoid of any cementocytes, right? So imagine there is a matrix which is occupied by the other substances which are forming the matrix as well as cementocytes, right? In case of cellular cementum versus in case of acellular cementum, where the complete matrix is devoid of any cells, right? So the volume which would be comprising of the cementocytes is occupied by the base matrix which is present, right? That is the cementoid which is present. Therefore, acellular cementum is more calcified when compared to cellular cementum. So the ninth difference is regarding the Sharpie's fibers in cellular versus acellular cementum. So in case of acellular cementum, the Sharpie's fiber are the major component which is present. So again, we can correlate here as acellular cementum is devoid of any cementocytes. Therefore, the Sharpie's fiber are more predominantly present compared to cellular cementum, where an amount of the matrix is formed by the cementocytes as well. Therefore, the Sharpie's fibers are less in number. So the tenth difference is regarding the insertion of Sharpie's fibers in cellular versus acellular cementum. In case of primary cementum, the Sharpie's fibers are inserted at right angles to the root surface, whereas in case of secondary cementum, these fibers are arranged parallel to the root surface. Now, this thing is very important, right? So you should always remember the orientation and the insertion of Sharpie's fibers. So our 11 difference is regarding the thickness of cellular cementum versus acellular cementum. So coming to primary cementum, the thickness ranges from 30 to 50 micrometers, right? Whereas in case of secondary cementum, the thickness is more than 1 micrometer, right? It might range from 1 to several micrometers. Now here in the figure, we can see that the cellular cementum is quite bulky, right? So the thickness is more of the cellular cementum as compared to acellular cementum. So our 12th difference is regarding the regularity of cellular versus acellular cementum. So our primary cementum is more regular, right, as compared to secondary cementum, which is slightly irregular. So a quick recap of whatever differences we have studied so far, right? So starting with acellular cementum, A, right? A is the first alphabet of the alphabet series, right? So this is the cementum which is formed first, that is before the teeth reaches the occlusal plane, right? Then acellular, that means it is devoid of any cells or it is devoid of cementocytes, right? Then again, acellular, it is written as ACELL. So from L you can remember location, right? So it is located towards the coronal portion of the root, right? So as this cementum is devoid of any cells, it is acellular. Therefore, the rate of formation is slow, right? So indirectly you can correlate as the rate of formation is slow, so that this cementum is formed in a more regular manner, right? So the composition of the acellular cementum is more regular, right? And therefore, as the rate of formation is slow, so the incremental lines of Salter, right, which denote the period of rest as well as activity, are more abundantly present, right? So incremental lines as well as the Sharpie's fibers are more in number in acellular cementum, and it is devoid of any cementocytes. Therefore, this cementum is more calcified as compared to cellular cementum. So in this picture, see, we can see that in case of acellular cementum, it is present just below the dentine. It is devoid of any cells, right? And also the thickness is very less, right? So the thickness ranges between 30 to 50 micrometers only. So these are the key differences between cellular versus acellular cementum. So guys, this was all about cellular versus acellular cementum. In total, we have listed about 12 differences, right? So do remember these differences. I have tried to make it as simple as it could be, right? Also, I have given you a way to remember this, right? So you can remember all of these points by just remembering the letter acellular cementum and by connecting a bit of dots, right? So this was all about the differences. I hope you all understood this topic very well. This is Dr. Snehal signing off. Bye bye. Take care.